In this tutorial we're going to be learning how to make one of these half hexagons that I used to straighten the sides of my Hexadaisy blanket. The full blanket pattern I'll link down in the description, and I will put up the tutorial for the full hexagon up here now. But let's get crocheting one of these half hexagons. In the last tutorial we made a full hexagon and we started in the centre and we worked in rounds going further and further out until we made our hexagon. We're going to do something similar for the half hexagon, but we're actually going to be working in rows, not rounds. So we're going to be starting in the centre and then we're actually going to be working back and forth like this in an almost semicircle way rather than going all the way around. That's to get this half hexagon motif. So let's get started. So just like the full hexagon, I'm going to start with a double magic ring. So hopefully you've had a lot of practice of this technique now. So I've wrapped the yarn around my first finger 3 times, putting my crochet hook underneath those first 2 loops and grabbing the third with my hook and pulling it under those 2 loops of yarn and then gently removing the magic ring from my finger. Then I'm going to chain 1. This does not count as a stitch. And then I'm going to work my first round into the centre of that magic ring, and our first round is 4 single crochet. So that's 1 single crochet, 2 single crochet, 3 single crochet, and then 4 single crochet, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we're going to tighten our magic ring. So I'm going to pull on this yarn tail until one of those 2 strands starts to tighten. There's that one there. So I'm going to pull on that strand of yarn that started to tighten up the centre of our half daisy, and then I'm going to pull on that yarn in to get rid of that final loop. So you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 single crochets that are kind of in a semicircular shape here. So we're not going to be joining our rounds. So don't make a slip stitch into that first stitch. You want to leave this edge like it is. And then to start round 2, chain 1, and then we're actually going to turn our little tiny half daisy centre over to work from the back. So I'm going to flip it over just like that. And then we're going to work into the backs of these single crochet stitches, and we're going to work 2 single crochet into each of those 4 stitches until we have 8 single crochet. So let's do that together. So that is our first and our second one, both worked into the same stitch. And then I'm going to do 2 single crochet into the next stitch, 1, 2, and then the next 2 single crochet into the next stitch. And then the final 2 single crochet into that final stitch. 1, 2. So you can see I've not joined these rounds, and that's what gives us that semicircular shape for that daisy centre, because this is going to be the edge of our blanket here. So now I'm going to fasten off this yarn by chaining 1 and then snipping my yarn tail and pulling that yarn tail through that chain 1 and giving it a little tug. So that's the centre of our half daisy hexagon finished. So at the end of round 2 is the only point where we're not turning for this whole hexagon. On all the other rounds, I think we turn at the end of each round. But I found that the half hexagon just looked a bit neater if round 2 and round 3 both were facing the right side. It doesn't matter too much though if you want to turn or you've accidentally turned, it's totally fine. So if we have a look at our little semicircle here, it's a little bit small, probably should have used some thicker yarn. So I've got my 8 single crochet here, and we're actually going to be joining our cream yarn to this stitch here. This is where we ended, and we're going into this stitch here. So I'm just going to put my hook into there, and then we'll grab my cream yarn and join our colour. So if you can see, that's where I'm putting my hook to join the cream yarn. Okay, so I've got my cream yarn, and we're going to join the colour just like we did in the full daisy hexagon by laying that yarn across our crochet hook, grabbing that loop and pulling it through that very first stitch. I'm going to tuck my tail out of the way, and we're ready to start round 3, which is the daisy petals. We're going to start this round with a chain 4 that's going to count as a treble crochet, And this stitch is sort of an edging stitch. We're going to be crocheting around this chain later, so it doesn't matter if it's messy or anything like that. So now we're going to start our petals. We're going to do a treble cluster just like we did in the full hexagon. So I'm yarning over twice and putting my hook into that second stitch. I'm not going back into that same stitch that we joined the yarn. We're going into the stitch next to that. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2, and then I'm going to stop because I've made that very first partial treble crochet of our cluster just like we did with the full hexagon. So now yarn over twice again and go back into that same stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. We've now made 2 partial treble crochets, so I'm going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on my hook, and that's created our first daisy petal. So now we're going to chain 2 and repeat that into the next 5 stitches until we've got 1 stitch left that we haven't worked. So I'm going to yarn over twice, put my hook into the next stitch and make one of those 2 treble clusters just like we just did into that stitch, and then I'm going to chain 2. And we're going to keep going round until we've just got 1 stitch left that we haven't worked. So you will have that chain 4 that we started with and then 6 petals. So I'm just going to skip ahead until there and then I'll explain what we do with that last stitch. So I've now worked 6 total treble cluster petals and I've got 1 stitch unworked at this side of the hexagon here, this stitch here. And into that final stitch, we're not going to be making a cluster to make a petal. We're going to be making an edging stitch, which is just a treble crochet into that stitch, not a cluster, just a normal treble crochet. And this mirrors what we did at this side with our chain of 4 that counts as a treble crochet. So those 2 stitches there are my edge stitches. So we're going to be crocheting along this edge later, picking up stitches as we go, and we're actually going to be working around that treble crochet and that chain. So that's why we've done that, is to provide a sort of edge that we can crochet into without ruining these 6 petals here. Okay, we're now going to fasten off and then we'll move on to round 4. So I'm going to fasten off just like I did before with a chain of 1, snipping my yarn tail and then using my hook to pull it through and giving it a little tug to tighten it up. So now we're ready to start round 4. So I've got my contrast yarn ready to join to my half daisy, but first we're going to have a look at this and identify the front and the back. So for consistency with the rest of the blanket, I've written the pattern so that the front of the petals is the front of the daisy hexagon. So if you're not sure about how to identify the front and back of a row, the front of your crochet row is a lot smoother and all this thread sort of face in one diagonal direction and it's a lot smoother. Whereas the back, if we have a look at it, it's a lot more bumpy. Can you see that? Those stitches are a lot more bumpy. So this is the back and this is the front, and we're going to be turning before we start this row. So we're going to turn it and work from the back. And then we're not going to be joining our contrast colour yarn to the top of that first stitch. We're actually going to be joining it in between that treble crochet and that first petal there. So into that space there. That's where we're going to be joining our yarn. So I'm just going to join the yarn just like we've been doing. I've got a lot of tails to deal with. Okay, now we're ready to start round 4. So I'm going to start with a chain of 3 that counts as our first double crochet, and I'm going to make another double crochet into that same space, not into the stitch, into that same space we joined the yarn. And then we're going to be working into all the spaces on this round. We're not going to be working into the tops of the stitches. So in that next space we're going to work 3 double crochet, 1, 2, 3. And then in the next space, we're going to be doing what we did for the corners in the full hexagon. We're going to be working 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet to make that hexagon corner. So let's make 1 double crochet and then 2 double crochet. And then chain 2 and then another 2 double crochet into that same space. 1, 2. And then in the next space we're going to work 3 double crochet, so that's our first double crochet, our second double crochet and our third double crochet. Then into the next space we're going to work 2 double crochet, chain 2, and then 2 more double crochet into that same space. So 1, 2, and then work 3 double crochet into the next space. So we're almost at the end of this round, and just like we did over here at the start of this round, we're going to be working our stitches in the space between that treble crochet and that petal. So I'm going to be working my last 2 double crochet into that space there. So that's 1 double crochet and then the second double crochet. So now we're ready to start round 5. So to start round 5, chain 3, this counts as our first double crochet stitch, and then we're going to make a double crochet into that same stitch there, so that very first stitch. Often when we work double crochet in rows we actually skip this stitch, but for this hexagon don't do that. Make a stitch into that first stitch. Going to make a double crochet into that stitch there. And then we're going to work 1 double crochet into each stitch along this side of the half hexagon until we get to that corner chain here. So I'm just going to work 1 double crochet into those stitches and I will meet you at that corner. So I've crocheted up until this corner space here, and then I'm going to work a corner group into this chain 2 space, and that corner group is just 1 double crochet, a chain of 2, and then 1 more double crochet. And then I'm going to work a double crochet into each stitch until the next space. So I've worked 1 double crochet into each stitch along this half hexagon side, and then in the corner I'm going to work a double crochet, then chain 2, then a double crochet, and I'm going to work a double crochet into each stitch until we get to that last stitch, which was our starting chain of the previous round. So I've crocheted along this side of the half hexagon and I've got 1 stitch left, which is the top of this starting chain here. If I turn it over you can see that we're back to that starting chain, and what we're going to do is we're going to finish off with 2 double crochet into the same stitch. So we started our round with 2 double crochet into the same stitch, and we're ending our round with 2 double crochet into the same stitch. I'm saying round, I mean row, you know what I mean. So let's work 2 double crochet into the top of that chain. So if I bring this a bit closer you'll be able to see exactly where I'm putting my hook. So I'm putting my hook there into the top of that starting chain. If I show you from this side, this is what it looks from the back. And I'm going to work 2 double crochet into that space there. So that's round 5 finished, and for rounds 6 and 7 we basically do the same. So we start with a chain of 3, which counts as our first double crochet, then we turn our work over, and then we do a double crochet back into that same stitch that we started in, so that very first stitch. Then we work a double crochet into each stitch until we get to a corner space. In the corner space we work a double crochet, chain 2 double crochet. Then again we work a double crochet into each stitch, and then we work one of those double crochet, chain 2 double crochet corners. And again we work 1 double crochet into each stitch apart from that very last stitch, which happens to be our starting chain from the last round. We work 2 in that last stitch. So 2 in the first stitch, 2 in the last stitch, and then a double crochet into every other stitch in the corners, 1 double crochet, 2 chain. So I'm going to leave you to work rounds 6 and 7, and then I'll meet you back here at the end of round 7, and then I'll take you through round 8. And I think round 8 is the trickiest part of this entire blanket, so we will go through that slowly. So I have finished round 8 of the hexagon and I've fastened off just like we've done before, and I'd recommend at this point double checking your stitch count, which is underneath round 8 in the written pattern. So my next step is I'm going to weave in all of my yarn ends, because that makes crocheting along this side a lot easier. But I am going to leave my very center tail where we worked into that magic ring, and that will just make our life a bit easier when we crochet across this. Just trust me at this point, weave in all your ends apart from that one at the very center of your daisy, and then come back to this tutorial. So I have finished weaving in all of my ends, and then we're just going to orient ourselves and make sure we're looking at the half hexagon from the front. So I know it's the front because these stitches are facing the right way, and the stitches from round 7 are facing me. So that is the front of the stitches. I can see those V's at the top of the stitch. So now I know I'm working from the front. We're actually going to be working this round a little bit differently to the previous 7 rounds because we're going back to rounds. Because we've been turning and working back and forth in that sort of semicircle shape, we've been working rows up until this point. Now we're going to work rounds. We're going to start in this corner here, not this corner. We're going to start in this corner here. We're going to work around these 2 sides, and then we're actually going to work stitches into the sides of these stitches along here to neaten up this edge. And then we're going back up here and just start finishing off with an invisible join back in this corner. So we're actually working all the way around this half hexagon. For this tutorial, you're also going to need 2 stitch markers. These don't need to be fancy stitch markers like this. They could be safety pins, hairpins, a scrap bit of yarn. Just we need 2 per half hexagon so that we can mark where our corner stitch is in these 2 corners, because it's a little bit differently to these 2 corners. And trust me, you want to put these stitch markers in the right place because it will help you so much when you come to sewing your hexagons together. So let's get started with this round. I'm going to join my cream yarn into that corner space there. Okay, so I'm joining my yarn just like we've done previously by laying it across my hook and then pulling it through the half hexagon. And now I'm ready to start round 8. We're going to start with a chain of 1, and this is actually going to count as our first single crochet. And then we're going to work 1 more single crochet into that same space. And then I'm going to do exactly what we did with the full hexagon, and I'm going to work a single crochet into each stitch along until I get to this corner, and in this corner I'm going to work 3 single crochet. So let's do that together. So I'm going to work a single crochet into each stitch across, and I will just skip to the corner. So I've worked a single crochet into each stitch until I get to the corner space, and then in the corner space I'm going to make 3 single crochet just like we did in the full hexagons. Then I'm going to work a single crochet into each stitch along this side of the half hexagon, but not into that final stitch. So I'm going to whiz across here and make a single crochet into each stitch, and then I will meet you back here. Okay, so I've single crocheted in each stitch along until that very last stitch just there, and into that last stitch we're going to work 3 single crochet for this corner. So all into the same stitch, work 3 single crochet. Now this is where the stitch marker comes into play. So if you remember from making our full hexagons, on our full hexagons our corner stitch was that second single crochet of any 3 single crochet groups, so that stitch there. However, on these corners, because the way the stitch counts work, our corner stitch is actually the 3rd stitch on this corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop a stitch marker into that stitch we just made. So we've got 1, 2, let me use this is a bit of a better thing for counting. So we've got 1, 2, 3 stitches all worked into that stitch there. That is our corner group of 3, and our corner stitch for this corner is actually this one. So that one we've just made, so you can see it's the 1, 2, the 3rd stitch of that group. So into the top of that stitch I'm going to pop that stitch marker, safety pin, whatever you're using, to mark this stitch. So into that stitch there. So when we get to this corner, I'm going to tell you to put your stitch marker into a different stitch. So make sure you keep watching this tutorial until this corner here, because in one of the versions of the pattern, the stitch I told you to put the stitch marker in was actually wrong. So just make sure you're watching all the way over till this corner so you know where to put your stitch marker. So for this side of the half hexagon, we're going to be working into the sides of the stitches. So if you've done this technique before, this will make sense, but if you've not come across this technique before, you might be thinking, what do I do? There's no tops of stitches, it's just stitches. There's none of those V's to put your hook under. Don't worry, It's not as difficult as it sounds. What we're actually going to do is we're going to be crocheting around the post of the stitch. So if we just have a look here, this one's nice and easy to show. So for this double crochet here, there's a post. So that is called the post of the stitch. If you've ever done front or back post stitches before, you know what I mean. So that is the post of the stitch. That double crochet there. We're going to be crocheting around that post, so into that gap between the first 2 stitches there for this round. So what we're going to do is we're going to work 2 single crochet around the post of this first stitch. So I'll bring it right up to the camera so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm putting my hook here. So there's the first stitch, there's the second stitch. I'm going to pull them apart slightly. I've got a space just here where I'm going around the post of that double crochet. Hope that makes sense. And then I'm going to make a single crochet. And that's how you work into the side of crochet. It's not as difficult as it sounds. So we're going to work another single crochet around that post into that same space. And we're going to repeat this until we get to the petals. So I'm going to work 2 single crochet into the sides of every double crochet stitch. So don't worry, I'm not going to fast forward until we get to this side. I'm going to be with you every step of the way along this side because it is the trickiest part of the whole blanket. So our next stitch is that stitch there. So I'm going to work 2 single crochet around that stitch into the same space. So you can kind of see where I've made those spaces in the crochet. And again, that's the post of the stitch. So I'm going in that space there and I'm working 2 single crochet, and then we'll find the space for this one, or I might need to wiggle this about a bit. So I'm actually going in there and making 2 single crochet. So now we're up to the daisy, and you're like, oh, okay, so we do 2 stitches into the side of each double crochet, that makes sense. But now we've got a treble crochet, and then down here we've got single crochets to deal with. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and distribute our stitches evenly across. So because our treble crochet is taller than our double crochet, we're actually going to work 3 single crochet around the post of that stitch. So I'm going into that space there. Do you remember that space that we worked those stitches into? We're going back into that same space between the stitches, and we're going to work 3 single crochet this time, just to accommodate that longer stitch. So I've done 1, 2, 3 there. So now we've got the centre of our daisy to deal with, and there isn't really obvious spaces where we put our hook. So it doesn't really matter exactly where you put your hook for these stitches, just put it in somewhere. And what we need to do is we need to distribute 5 single crochets across this yellow centre of the daisy. So I'm going to show you where I put my stitches, but don't worry if you're putting your hook in a slightly different space. As long as you've got 5 stitches evenly spaced across this, you will be fine. So I'm going to put my hook like in there, I guess, for the first one. Honestly, I think I put it in different stitches every time when I did these. And then maybe that space there. So I'm doing approximately 1 in that round, 1 in that round. Row, not round, I'm too used to granny squares. And there's 1, 2 single crochet. And then the reason why I told you to leave this end long is because what we're going to do for that central stitch, well, what I was doing to make it nice and central, is I'm actually going to pull my work a bit so that slightly opens that magic ring that we made. You can see that little hole there. I'm going to put my hook into it. It's a bit tight. And we're going to make our central single crochet of like 5 single crochet spread across the top. So you can see I've done 1 approximately into that round, 1 approximately into that round, and then 1 into the magic ring. And then I'm going to do 2 more. So I'm going to do 1, I don't know, maybe, I mean, that seems like the obvious space to go in. Let's go in that obvious space there. So I've done my 4th single crochet, and then I'm going to make a space here for my 5th single crochet. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 single crochets spread evenly across there. I went into different spaces. Honestly, I promise you, once the blanket is done, you won't notice these stitches. So now we're back to our chain 4 that counted as our treble crochet on this round. So we're going to do 3 single crochet around that post. So I'm doing 1, 2, 3. and then into around that post of that double crochet there, I'm going to do 2, so I'm going in that space there, 1, 2, and then I'm going to go in that space there around that starting chain there, 1, 2, and then again around that stitch I'm making a space. If you find that you're struggling to find a space, honestly just put your hook in anywhere you think looks like a space, as long as, I'm going to tell you how many stitches you should have across this side. So as long as your stitch count is right, I promise you it will work out okay. So we're now on the last round, well, the last row of double crochet working into the side. So we're going to do 2 more single crochet around this stitch here, which is our starting chain. So that's 1, 2. Okay, the difficult bit is done now. We've worked all of our stitches into the sides of this, into the sides of those stitches there. So we've done what we wanted to do. We've made a neat edge for this to crochet our border into, because our border is actually going to be here. So we've done it, we've done the hard bit. Okay, so we're going to now make another corner group, and we're going to make our corner group into the top of that chain 3. So we've already made 2 single crochet around that starting chain, and now we're going to make 3 more single crochet into the top of that starting chain. We're not going into that stitch there, that is not where we're going into this chain just here. You might have to pull these stitches down a bit to find it. These stitches might be up over the top of it, so pull those down until you can identify where that first chain is and put your hook into it. And we're going to make 3 single crochets for a corner group. So do you remember I said that in the first version of the pattern, it was either the US or the UK terms version, had you put your stitch marker in the 3rd single crochet here? That is wrong. We need to put it in the 1st single crochet. If you've bought the pattern recently, then it's all been corrected for a good few weeks now, that you need to put your stitch marker in that 1st. So we've got our group of, let me get my needle, it's a bit easier to show. So we've got our group of 1, 2, 3 single crochet here, and for this corner, so in this corner I got you to put it in your 3rd single crochet. In this corner we're going in the 1st single crochet. So we're going in that stitch there, the 1st single crochet of that 3 single crochet group. So I'm going to put a stitch marker in it, and it's kind of made, it's symmetrical now with the other stitch markers. If I show you it like this, you'll be able to see, get rid of those ends. So it's symmetrical, if you see what I'm saying. So I've got a stitch marker here and a stitch marker here, and this stitch marker's not up here. They're both sort of facing this side of the blanket. They're in sort of equivalent stitches in symmetry. So between these 2 stitch markers, we're going to count our stitches to make sure we have the right amount of stitches along here. So we've got, not including our ones with the stitch marker 3, we've got 2, 4, 6, 8. That was from our double crochet. Then another 3, that's 11. And then 5, that's 16. Then another 3, that's 19, and then another 8, that's 27. So you should have 27 stitches between those 2 stitch markers. So now we've checked that we've got the right number of stitches along this side here. I'm going to go ahead and make a single crochet into every stitch along this side of the half hexagon until we get to this corner. So I'm going to whiz along here and do that now, and then I'll meet you back at this corner and we'll finish off our half hexagon. So I've just finished doing my single crochet along this side of the half hexagon, and I'm now back at the corner that we started in. So if you remember, we started with a chain 1 that you can't really see very well there, and then a single crochet, and that needs to be a group of 3 single crochet to match the other corners. So to complete that group of 3, we're going to do 1 single crochet. Remember, that chain counts as our 1st single crochet. We're going to create that single crochet by a little bit of magic now. So we're going to cut our yarn tail as long as we did for the full hexagons. You might not need it, but in case we need it for sewing in our ends. So I'm going to cut it about 12 inches, 30 centimetres-ish. And then I'm going to pull that very long yarn tail through that last stitch, and we're going to finish off this half hexagon just like we did with the full hexagons with an invisible join. So I'm threading that end on my yarn needle, And then we're going to turn that first chain into a single crochet with an invisible join. So I'm going to put my yarn needle through both of the loops at the top of the stitch to the side of the starting chain, just there. Pull that through, not too tight, but so that thread there is approximately the same size as that thread there. And then we're going to put our needle through the back loop of the stitch on the other side of the join, just there. And then you do have a choice, you can knot it at the back of your work if you want to, but I didn't, just like we did with the full hexagons. And that is the half hexagon finished. If you want to learn how to sew all of your hexagons together, check out the tutorial that I've linked on your screen now.